Okay, everyone. So we're gonna reconvene and transition to our editors panel. We have a group of I won't say fantastic editors because I'm actually one of them. Although I know two of the editors are amazing. So we have Ruth Aguilera, who's at Northeastern University, who has been an editor at a number of different publications, two of which really stand out to me, being Organization Science and most recently Academy Management Review. And Chris Foreman, who is at Cornell. We were very fortunate to have him with us. And Chris, you're at Management Science, is that right? So another amazing publication. Myself, Chris Marcos, will also be joining the panel, and I have experience at Organization Science and Administrative Science Quarterly. So we'll go alphabetically. Ruth, do you want to kick us off? Say a little bit about, how you see emerging markets research as an editor, and any hints or tips you have for our participants.
Yeah. So, well, thank you. It's great to see all these emerging market scholars to join us. All of you, Mike Heath, Lourdes, Daniel Shapiro, Ravi, my colleagues, Ravi, and colleagues from Northeastern. And I also wanted to say thank you to Kun Yan, because he's done a great job organizing everybody, at least myself. So he's also in the call today. So, I think the question is how to publish work on emerging markets, kind of in top journals in the field, in very general journals, which I think most of you would be interested. And I mean, I guess I have like three quick points, and then we can come back to it. And some of these comes, some of these comments that I will make come from I edited two special issues, one on multi-Latinas and another one on family business from Asia. And then I realized that the first suggestion is that I realized that sometimes it's very important, if you're submitting to a journalist journal, it's very important to offer some context you can hear me well, no? Yeah. So it's very important to offer context on the setting that you're studying. Even if to you it might seem like very pedestrian or precarious, like if you look at the latest ASQ by Chris Marquis, like he talks a lot about Mao and what it is, and I think to many, maybe Chinese, it might seem very obvious, but to explain that to a general audience, it's very important to set up the study. So this is number one. Number two, I think one of the mistakes that people who do emerging markets might make is that sometimes we just try to replicate studies without, in the context of emerging markets, without taking advantage of the rich context, and we just replicate as opposed to maybe doing more external validity of those. And then the third comment, is that I think it's very important when you do research on emerging markets, because some people are suspicious because they are not familiar with it and they might be more insecure. It's very important to be very, explain the data very well, be very, very transparent, and even an extra, go an extra mile to explain the data, so the reviewers and the editors don't think that, are very clear on where the data comes from. Because sometimes, you cannot do S&P 500, so you need to say, this data has been published before, these people have used it, or is new data. And then if at all possible, go back to the context, because many people, many of you who do emerging markets work have access to actually the data. So if you could go, and then just to kind of conclude, because we said we would be short, I think for emerging markets, but in general, is to really have a lot of checkpoints. Like when you have your idea, have a checkpoint, check with people. When you have your research design, make sure you check it with you get feedback, and not necessarily friendly feedback, but if you could get somebody who can give you more candid feedbacks, like really hard feedback, that you will not, that you won't have a flawed study, or feedback that it might save you a lot of time down the road. So this would be like just to get us started, and then I will chip in with your comments from my colleagues here. Thank you, Chris.
Great. Yeah. Thanks so much, Ruth. Very, very much appreciate those very helpful comments. Actually, I think you've taken all the things that I was going to say. So my part will be short.
No. So I'll just say
great.
one more thing that I forgot. So one more thing is like, and as you can see, you know, Chris, Furman, and I, you're here, are not native speakers, and you know, Chris Marquis is. So I think, you know, there are some things that you can control, like, you know, people are more receptive if you have like nice English. So if you, you know, so that's one thing that you really should make sure that, you know, it reads well. So as you know, for people who do emerging market work and they are not native speakers, I think that's something that's super important. Yeah. So
Yeah.
sorry.
Great. No problem. Good. Very important point. Yeah. Chris Foreman, over to you.
Great. So thanks so much for having me here. So I'm going to briefly introduce kind of the journal. As Chris mentioned, I've worked in the information systems department in management science between 2014 and I concluded my term in mid 2020. And so my comments are going to be unofficial in some sense and based on that experience. A lot of my own work is kind of at the intersection of a lot of the topics in the conference this year, kind of digitization, strategy, innovation, and economics. And so, you know, the department, you know, looks at a range of issues around digitization and information systems and management at a variety of different levels, ranging from individuals in operating in digital environments, you know, such as mobile phones and online environments, the impacts of digital technologies on individuals, firms, region, and countries, as well as topics probably closer to the research in the conference this weekend, issues around firm use of information technology and the interrelationships with management practices and productivity, as well as a hot topic has become around platforms and ecosystems. And so, yeah, like Chris, I think Ruth already mentioned a couple of the the points that I was going to mention as well. So I'll say a couple of things. At the individual level, you know, we receive a number of papers on individual behavior in the countries that are on this program. And so I wouldn't say for those types of studies, you know, research on emerging markets is not sort of a separate stream per se. So for example, we've handled a large number of studies looking at users of and uses of mobile phones in China, for example, and other countries. You know, and so there's a lot of that kind of work that really, you know, because of the innovativeness in many of the countries on this program and those types of categories, really that's kind of the leading edge of research in a lot of different ways. And I don't think represented a separate stream from all the papers that we looked at within this category. I think closer to the topic that many of the papers in this conference are looking at, we have historically published a number of papers looking at kind of the interrelationships between firm investments and information technology, management, strategic decisions, and productivity. And so for, you know, examples of that, complementarities between IT and organizational practices, IT and labor, things of this nature. You know, it's probably true that the department hasn't published as many, you know, most of these studies have been using more data from, you know, the US or countries in Europe. And I think the reasons for that dovetail a lot with some of the things that Ruth was saying earlier. When I've seen papers also often from outside of these regions, they really haven't taken advantage of the setting as much as perhaps they could have. So many times sort of porting wholesale theories that have been tested in other environments without taking advantage of aspects of the setting that would help to move the theoretical contribution earlier or along, and so ends up not reaching sort of the level of contribution that we would like to see in the journal. And so as an editor, a lot of things I would have liked to see was either opportunities to develop boundary conditions based on the environment in which some of these hypotheses are being tested in emerging markets, or looked at questions that are particularly salient in some emerging market settings, such as the use of maybe IT and agricultural supply chains, uses of open source software that are particularly pronounced in certain emerging market contexts. Those were things that I think really would work very well. So yeah, those are just some thoughts to kick it off. Thanks very much.
I'm sorry, I was just muted for a second. Yeah, super, Chris, very much appreciated. I mean, I think, yeah, sort of going third, I think all the really smart and good points have already been taken. And I totally very much agree with a lot of the things that both Ruth and Chris have said. The one thing as an editor, so I was at Organization Science for a number of years. I just actually finished my second term at ASQ. And also as a Management Organization Review, which is a journal that's focused on emerging markets and China particularly. So, one thing, so now being at the editing thing for maybe about 10 years now, I must say, I think it's a better than ever time to be publishing on emerging markets. I remember the first papers, speaking as an author, not as an editor, that I sent in to a journal in a China context, and very strong reaction that this was not generalizable. It was about this unique context of China. Now I send my papers in about China, and the editor and reviewers want more details about China because they think it's actually an important context to learn and understand about. And I think many emerging markets, that's the case. Ruth mentioned that in the paper recently that Kunya and I published in ASQ on sort of the effect of sort of communist ideology on contemporary business and entrepreneurial management in China. Yeah, there's a lot of China-specific knowledge in there, which was your point, Ruth. And that was because we were told, this is important and we should really add this. And so I think that that's, something that bodes well for us studying emerging markets, that people are understanding that, of course, we need generalizable contributions, but also there are uniquenesses of context that is important to really understand. So I don't have a lot more additional to that. I mean, this is a real passion of mine, actually. I started out as a researcher mainly focused on US context, and through a variety of sort of random circumstances actually got connected to emerging markets. And I think that for our theories, for our understanding of business in general, for our ability to help, companies really being able to understand, all context is important. So I'll stop there and say, I'm happy to, all of us are happy to really answer questions you might have specifically about your papers, your contexts, and how you can potentially get them published. So, and we have about 15 minutes for questions, and then, the last sort of two parts of this session, we have the Best Paper Award, and then also the transition actually to the next GSEM conference. So that will happen in about 15 minutes. We have about 15 minutes for questions. So please put them in the Q&A or the chat function.
So since there are no questions, maybe I'll say something else.
Oh, great. And you have a question for Chris too. So,
while he thinks about the question that I made to him, so I have to say that in my experience, both at Org Science, also at Corporate Governance International Review, and now, that I have already 10 papers at AMR, you know, there are very few. I mean, I think I was 6 or 7 years at Org Science. There are very, very few emerging market papers submitted. And I don't know why, but I think that's, you know, what Chris is saying. There's a real good opportunity there because it needs to go to more specialty journals, but that's not necessarily the case. So I don't know about you, Chris, at ASQ, if you also, you know, had, because I mean, Chris F said that they didn't get many on emerging markets. But what about you at ASQ, Chris?
I feel we get a good amount, actually. I just looked at some statistics, and I would say like 30% of the papers are on emerging markets from, you know, India, China, Africa. There is a good amount. So a smaller percentage actually end up getting published, but I would say that there's increase, and this is just the last few years. So I'm saying that, you know, I do feel that there's
how about the topic? You know, not from authors from emerging markets, but from topics on emerging markets.
Topics on emerging markets, yeah. Yeah, there are particularly China, but also other, Brazil. Recently, I was an editor with a paper published on the context was Brazil. Papers published on, you know, I've been editor of some papers published on Kenya, a number of papers in China. So I do feel, and you know, ASQ publishes like maybe, you know, 16 to 20 articles a year. So it's not like there's, you know, very, very rarely are there papers that I'm an editor on that get through. So, you know, a lot of paper, you know, again, I don't want to overemphasize it, but I would say that there is increasing percentage, maybe a third, I would say, are coming through that are emerging market oriented.
So yeah, so let me follow up on that. So I would say that at Org Science there were very, very few papers on emerging markets, very, very few. And I thought, you know, that was a really missed opportunity from authors. But at AMR, our chief editor, who's Sherry Thatcher, you know, her goal, her mission, and that's one of the reasons why I joined the journal, is to be a lot more inclusive with topics that they are much, much broader. So, you know, I encourage everybody doing, I think that would be a good outlet for people who have theory papers, AMR, yeah.
I mean, to clarify my comment, I think papers that are based on data from emerging markets that look at individual user behavior, you know, actually quite a large fraction. I don't know what the percentage is, but it's quite significant. I would say, you know, among papers sort of looking at user behavior online or platform ecosystems or those kinds of things, it might be as high as, you know, what Chris was saying, 30, 40% or even higher. I think papers that use firm level data and explore issues that are, you know, sort of unique to emerging markets, I think there you're right. The number of submissions is quite low. I don't know what it is, but much smaller. So there's a real you know, disparity based on the type of topic. Papers based on individual behavior, using data from emerging markets very high, sort of firm level types of things much lower.
Yeah, so I think also here in this context, we should push for a change on this one, because for a number of reasons, as I presented earlier, there are more Chinese companies than American companies in the Global 500. Also, they dominate industries, and also they dominate market share of the very technological products like smartphones, etc. So I think what happens also is that I see that academics are a little bit conservative. We don't know much about other databases than the ones in this country. So then we accept less, or we suspect of other databases. And I think we should be more open, because we need more diversity in all these journals. Even 30% is not enough. It should be 50% at least. So we should push for that. And then the editors should change as well. So academics, let me tell you, in many, many, many places, I'm the only woman speaking. I am the only chair in this conference. I'm the only, so we have to push for diversity, and this conference in particular pushes for diversity from emerging markets. So emerging markets are up there. Tsinghua and Beijing University are about the top scientific schools in scientific papers publishing, according to a couple of rankings. So they are there. So we should be, because otherwise we'll miss out. The technological divide, will have an academic divide. Ones will publish somewhere and others in another places. So,
but let me step in. But
yeah.
I would say, Lourdes, I would say that, for instance, the fact that Chris was at ASQ, that's why he got so many papers, because people identify as like, oh, he's writing this, I can also write there. I got a lot of cross-national papers, but not so much emerging markets. So I think if editors, like many of the people, many of you here, like Mike Peng, you, David, Daniel, are editors, then the author can identify and, and the paper is treated better. Like, more the data, you're not as suspicious because you know it. So I don't know, like, I think it's, that's the way to change things. But maybe we could talk more about how to help the authors publish there. Like Chris has a question.
Sure. So there's a few questions.
There's a question there from Marcus.
I don't see the Marcus question actually. Oh, Marcus, you
so
put in the
a question there from Marcus Tausig.
So it's in the chat, not the Q&A thing.
Yeah, there's a question from Marcus Tausig. So maybe Marcus can read it. I can read it if you want.
So Marcus, please, why don't you tell us your question? Marcus, can you hear me, or are you on? Or can you unmute, or I can read it if it's not possible.
Oh, maybe he's not, because maybe he's.
Hello.
Oh, he's here. Yeah.
Marcus, yeah, great. Please tell us your question.
Okay, yeah, sorry, I was confused on whether or not I was connected. Yeah, so I was just, I was hearing Chris, your earlier question about, oh, sorry, I think I can, there we go. I was seeing your earlier, I was hearing your earlier comment about how you were receiving a fair amount of emerging markets submissions, but was curious if you had some advice for people who are submitting in terms of what were common weaknesses that you were seeing.
Sure. So I think a couple of things. So one, I do see them getting through. So, so I've spent 6 years at ASQ. I don't know how many papers I published, not more than 10 or 12, not a lot. I would say that a third of those were emerging markets from, probably 3 or 4 on China, Brazil, India, Africa, 2 of Chris Yankee's papers. So, I think that it's, they are getting through. I would say that in general, and this is something, for maybe some of the PhD students on the line, or maybe some of the junior professors, I find that, maybe sometimes people send things a little too early, and particularly maybe if you're a graduate student or an early career professor, and there is a lot of it's unfortunate, but it's a reality that there's a lot of sort of nuance in the publishing process, and it's sort of in some ways more of an art than a science. And I think maybe maybe collaborating with this, sort of a more senior scholar might be another way to help, sort of the junior folks learn how to actually get into these, journals like Org Science or ASQ. So I do think a lot's getting through, and this is something that has actually changed. I mean, I agree with Lourdes's point. There needs to be more, definitely. But, when I was getting started in this, it was like very much lower percentages. And I think that actually, at least in my experience, the trend is moving in a good way. So I'm optimistic that things will continue to get better. Although, after my second term, I just stepped down from ASQ. So So maybe, I'm sure the other folks there, the Chris Amajian is there who does international stuff, will continue to support the emerging markets focus.
Again, but the editorial boards need more diversity, because
Yeah, I
as
agree.
Ruth was saying, then if there is diversity, then people dare to submit. And one
Right.
more thing I would say is that we should, or you should be more daring to publish also articles from emerging markets universities. There are excellent scholars.
Totally.
So then what happens? You know,
Yeah.
he's Harvard, he or she, many times, Harvard or Cornell, benefit of the doubt. While there are now very good scholars all over the world.
I agree, Lourdes. And it is, I think that we need to have more outreach, have more conferences, have more ways to have. So I think that's actually where the solution lies. It is a situation where, there is, a lot of, I think, sort of nuanced work that needs to be done to get the work from these scholars into the top journals. And I think that, having conferences and collaborations is a way to definitely get that done. So we have let's do one or two questions from our audience before sort of transitioning over to the last part of our session. So we have someone from Zijian Wang has a question for Chris Foreman. Zijian, would you like to ask that yourself? Zijian, can you hear us? All right. I'll go ahead and say it in the interest of time. So Zijian asks, could you please provide future researchers with some ideas in combining the innovation technology and emerging markets work? And any examples you have would be great.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I'll give you some examples of, based on papers I've seen or papers that I've handled in the past within the journals that I've been at. So one has been, in management science, I know in the past we've published papers looking at the implications of digitization on outcomes in agricultural supply chain. So there was a paper, I can't remember all the co-authors, Kamalini Ramdas and some other co-authors a few years back that looked at how improvements in information flows to farmers in India affected price dispersion in agricultural markets. And they used kind of an interesting exogenous shock based on changes in information availability from a workers' strike that influenced the ability to farmers to access Reuters information. So that was kind of one example of a paper that that was published from some time back. I think Lourdes might have mentioned in the chat digital divide issues, which I think is a great example. I would say not only issues around digital divide in terms of access to communications technology or IT hardware and software, but just access to knowledge that might help users make use of digital technologies. So that's, those are two examples of things that I think are particularly salient in emerging market settings. I'll just say one more. We have a lot of in IT, there's a lot of theories around management practices and IT investment in firms that, for example, that have shown that complementarities with respect to IT investment and centralization or decentralization of decision-making within firms. And perhaps in emerging market contexts where there's different management practices, some of these, you might get a different set of relationships than we've seen among firms in the US or Europe, for example. So those are all things that, I think are areas that are ripe for exploration. Thanks for the question.
Great, thank you, Chris. So we do have these two other things before 8 we need to do. So we don't have a lot of time, but just we have two additional questions that I want to make sure we get a chance to answer from an anonymous attendee. So maybe Ruth, I don't know if you'd mind commenting on both of them very quickly, and I can also do so. Sort of fruitful areas of research for emerging market context, and any experiences in rejecting papers after multiple rounds.
Okay, so I guess let's see. I'll start with the first one, with emerging market interesting questions. I think the time is really ripe for like being trying to be creative, not doing the same old studies that we have been doing in the West, but just bringing in new theories, new methods, new contexts, and bring that to the top tier journals. So, and sometimes even like refute ideas that have been well established in the West, or well established because now we are in a digital world, we are in a global, deglobalized world, and just kind of say, up to here this happened, but this doesn't happen anymore, or we're in this platform world. So anything, I would say anything that kind of refutes what we already know or kind of refines it, that can be very, very interesting. And the emerging markets have a lot of food for thought there. So I would, I don't have anything specific, but there's definitely anything that's, digital, or it's about social inequalities, or it's about, global warming and policies. I think those are, and I could go on and on things related to corporate governance, which is what I do. But so I would approach it that way, like trying to be more innovative, more radical. I think that will have a higher chance to, be interesting to the editors. Then, in terms of the second question is, the second question is a question about, have you ever been rejected in the third review? And so I'll just, I like to put a positive spin on everything. And I think we can all say a lot of horror stories. Like, everybody, like if you're long enough, in the field, or sometimes early or sometimes late, there are lots, like there could be some horror stories or some bad luck, generally, like when you have, I think you need to start from the premise that editors like to publish papers. Editors read the paper with, like, even if it's, a paper that from an emerging market that is not written from somebody that has gone to Cornell and has been refined, and they know how to exactly position an ASQ. An editor is trying to find the diamond in the rock and try to coach the authors on how to do that. Because editors really want to publish papers, and they spend a lot of time reading the paper and, picking good reviewers. And so, I would say that, I mean, at least my experience, and I think it's probably the experience of the two Chris's, is that, you only give an R&R if you think there's a chance that the paper is going to advance. Otherwise, you don't waste authors' time. And then in that case, you give a lot of good feedback, and reject the paper. And hopefully, that feedback is useful to go somewhere else. So I guess, my reaction to, you're asking about the third round rejection, my reaction would be, it's really bad luck. I mean, like you can just attribute it to the luck. And, and then the other side that I would do is that I would do some introspective kind of thinking, and just kind of think, what do you think you did wrong? Or, what do you think it went wrong? Like, and maybe, I mean, it should be clear enough from the editor on why that he or she is rejecting the paper. So this would be, and I'm sorry about that, because, a lot of work goes, I'm really sorry about that, because a lot of work goes into that. but hopefully the paper, sometimes the paper is, it has happened to me, and the paper was much, much worse after the third revision because I had tortured the paper so much that it was worse. So I cannot say that after third reviews it was better, the paper, and I could send it somewhere else because I went back to the original version. But that's all I can say. So hopefully things even out in your career.
Yeah, thank you, Ruth. And I would actually just sort of second. I mean, editors do want to publish papers. I mean, this is the thing that I think, before I was an editor on the other side, you feel it's like this sort of gatekeeper that is trying to prevent you. And I do think it's actually the opposite. I mean, people want to publish top papers. So I think, so yeah, sort of working with the review process, I think, is tremendously important. So great. So we have two very important things to do before we transition to our paper sessions. So the first is presenting the Best Paper Award, which Lourdes is going to do. So Lourdes, I know you're going to read it. Would you? I can share the screen, or would you like to share the screen with?
Okay, if you want, you share the screen.
Sure, I'll share the screen for the first one. So if you want to sort of just, you can say.
So we had two papers nominated for the Best Award. And the Best Paper Award is for Jasmina Chauvin, Raj Chowdhury, and Tommy Fung from Jasmina from Georgetown, Raj from Harvard Business School, and Tommy from the same school. So thank you very much and congratulations.
I might have got to. Yeah,
and the second one, the one that was nominated but didn't get the was finalist, was for Zoltan Aks from George Mason, Laszlo Serb from University of Pécs, Eva Komlossi from MTA PTE, Abraham Song from George Mason, and David Odres from Indiana University. So congratulations, because there were many papers and these ones were the best. So thank you very much.
Yeah, so congratulations, all of you, and yeah, it's really wonderful to have you submit to our conference. So thank you.
Okay, before we move to the paper sessions, I wanted to pass the word to Daniel Shapiro and Jing Li, who will be organizing the next conference. Daniel and Jing Li, the floor is yours.
Hi, I don't know where Jing is, but she's around someplace. So it's my great pleasure to invite you to join us for the next GSEM conference, which will be held in May or June of 2022, that is 18 months hence. It will be hosted by the Jack Austin Center for Asia Pacific Business Studies at the Beatty School of Business at Simon Fraser University. I can't tell you at this moment whether it will be online or live or some hybrid. Canada has been a little bit tough on letting people into the country if they feel that your home country is not up to COVID speed. So we can't say yet, but we're hoping that you will be able to join us in Vancouver. I've chosen this background. Those of you who have been to Vancouver will know that it is one of the most beautiful cities in the world. And that's sort of where it looks like, what it looks like. Actually, it looks like that a lot of the time because it rains a lot. So it is gray a fair bit of the time, but not always. And in May and June, the sun always shines. So we're looking forward to joining, for having you join us there. What I can say for sure is that the Jack Austin Center for Asia Pacific Business Studies, which is going to be the co-sponsor of the event, was founded and named after Senator Jack Austin, who was principal secretary to Pierre Elliott Trudeau the First when he was Prime Minister. Canada was among the first countries in the world to establish diplomatic relations with China in the Mao era. So the connection between Canada and China goes back a long ways, and it was centered to a great degree in Vancouver. So I think it's particularly, we're very excited about bringing that legacy to the conference. Vancouver itself fashions itself as the gateway to the Asia Pacific, and in many statements about Vancouver, you will hear that we think we are the most Asian city outside of Asia. While that's not true in absolute numbers, it is true in percentages. Nearly 50% of the population of Vancouver is of Asian origin. So we are, and we think of ourselves as an Asian city, and we hope that that Asianness will permeate the themes of the conference. I want to say just one other thing, that although you can be sure that Asia will be prominent in the themes of the paper, Vancouver also happens to be a mining capital of the world. A lot of people don't know this, but there are more mining exploration and development companies in Vancouver than just about any other city in the world, maybe more than any other city in the world. And the links between the mining sector and Latin America are deep and strong. So if you've been following some of my more recent publications, I have took a while to understand that Vancouver was a mining center, so I've become interested in the mining sector globally, in Latin America. So I'm certain that we will find a way to find some very interesting people to talk about the role of natural resources in emerging markets, and almost surely in Latin America. So I'm looking forward to meeting you all and greeting you all in 2022. Thank you.
Great. Wow. So I'm super excited. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew the Asia connection with Vancouver. I didn't know the natural resource and Latin American connection. So I think it will be a fantastic conference, and hopefully we'll be in a position where we all can be there and maybe meet some of these companies and have some, really interesting practitioner-oriented events as well. So thank you, Daniel. So great. So that, sort of concludes our, in some ways, sort of plenary type of activities, and we're going to transition into our paper sessions now. So let me turn it over to our first paper session facilitator, moderator, Andrew Foley. So Andrew, do you want to introduce the paper session, please?